Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here. Katie Rose is a yoga teacher, Ayurveda guide, and author with over 25 years of experience in the world of wellness, which includes many thousands of teaching hours under her belt. She is also a doula and teacher for the Australian Doula College. Katie was the manager of the prestigious TriYoga Centre in London before moving to Sydney and opening Samadhi Yoga in 2004, followed by Jivamukti Yoga Sydney, which at its peak was a 4-studio business. Her popular online courses have helped hundreds of women from all over the world to empower themselves. Much of Katie's work focuses on the Australian seasons, landscape, and Indigenous culture, and she has a keen passion for respecting First Nations wisdom as well as animal rights and the environment. She is the founder and host of the annual Bhakti Women's Online Yoga Summit, and the author of several internationally available books published by Rockpool Publishing, including Mindful Living and The Yoga of Birth. Katie helps women go from feeling stuck and overwhelmed to living a life that is vibrant, creative, and abundant. She now lives in Sydney, Australia with her partner and her 5 children in a loud and busy household where her meditation practice keeps her sane. Katie, it's so wonderful that we can have this window to chat together today. Thank you for being with me and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
You have spent what appears to be a significant number of years immersed in yoga and Ayurveda, both personally and professionally. You've done some remarkable things, it appears at my end, and studied with exceptional teachers and mentors. You've masterfully managed your business and motherhood with so much grace. So could you share with the listener your personal story that has brought you to where you are and to what you're working on right now?
Gosh, so much I could say around that. I mean, the part that jumped out in what you just said, Amy, is amazing teachers and mentors. I feel like I've had a calling for this work for as long as I can remember, since certainly early teens. And my instinct is it's a past life calling, really, like it's a kind of resonant thread from a previous incarnation, it seems to me. But what has nurtured that calling and really allowed it to be birthed into fruition is that I've just been so blessed in my life to have the most incredible teachers. And I feel that I have a very good karma when it comes to teachers, because, I mean, there's that famous, somewhat cliched expression that when the student is ready, the teacher will arrive. And that has certainly been the case for me in my life, not just in the terms of, yoga and Ayurveda, although that's absolutely been true, but also in other ways. Like as I've grown into parenting, for example, I've found myself surrounded by wonderful role models and inspirational leaders in that realm. As I've expanded my business and grown my capacity to generate income and particularly work in the online space, again, I've had amazing mentors in that area. So I just seem to be blessed with a very, very fortunate experience of when I'm looking for guidance, it kind of magically appears. And so, I've worked hard in different ways. I've worked hard in my work. I've worked hard to be a good parent. And I've worked hard in my spiritual practice. There's no doubt about it. I enjoy hard work. I think of myself as a hardworking person, and I see that as a very positive thing. Like I celebrate that. And at the same time, mixed in with that hard work, there's also been many, many blessings.
Well, that seems very evident to me. And you conduct yourself, what I see and with what you share online, with so much grace and so much depth. And look, you've spent so much time in the yoga and Ayurveda community, even back in the UK and managing studios, and then coming to Australia and setting up your own. I do recall attending Samadhi Yoga. I actually, in preparation for our chat, I was trying to look into my emails to see, I can't remember what course or training I did at Samadhi Yoga a long time ago, but it was at least, I think it was 11 years ago now. And I came down for something and I don't even remember what it was, but I distinctly remember the studio space, and it was just beautiful. And still today, when I see how you represent yourself and your work online, it's just exquisite, and it's very rich in depth and rich in wisdom. And I think what you're sharing about how you've been graced with these teachers, that evidently comes through because you have been exposed to so much richness. And I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think Elena Brower has been a huge influence in your life, both personally and professionally. I know she's been an influence for me in both realms as well, particularly as a mother. And it's such a gift to have the influence of, particularly of these women, being a lighthouse or a beacon for us. And so this leads me to a question I'd like to ask you. Your offerings serve both students of yoga and Ayurveda, as well as, let's say, professionals. And I'd love to inquire into your thoughts around Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. I know you teach a course on this, and the sutras are highly regarded, obviously, and studied within the yoga community. And I think it's becoming more evident that there are two notable perspectives. So one being the more, let's say, masculine, I don't obviously mean male, but masculine and academic approach, which translates the Sanskrit, the sutras in a very direct and perhaps literal way, which can give rise to a perspective that the sutras are more relevant to, a renunciate and not so much the householder. The second is that we seem to unravel hidden teachings and secrets, which, let's say, that's a more feminine approach, which it seems to come through a more of a lineage-based study or teachings, if you will. So would you like to expand on that? I'd love to know what it is that you grasp about these deeper esoteric teachings of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras when you come from that more feminine approach, if you will, that you teach to your community, and what it is that you think we're missing from that study.
I love that you've asked me this question. Such a juicy one. Well, to reference teachers, because I think it's always really important to credit who we're learning from. Someone who's been a very important guide for me in this area is an elder in the yoga community, Nishala Joy Devi, who has been teaching Yoga Sutra for decades and has written a book, The Secret Power of Yoga, which is basically a translation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra seen through the lens of the feminine. So you can see which camp I'm in just from that part of the answer. I think one of the things that I have grown into as a yogi and as a practitioner of yoga and Ayurveda is more and more of a capacity to trust my own instinct and to read scripture, to inquire into the teachings, to practice my sadhana from a perspective of my interpretation, my lived experience, my understanding is as valid as anyone else's. And I don't mean that with arrogance whatsoever. I'm not sort of glorifying myself and saying that I know anything more than anyone else. I think that invitation is available to everyone. It's available to all of us. And because of the education system that we're raised in, because of Western thinking, because of the patriarchy, we tend very much towards looking to authorities to give us information in areas where we don't necessarily have deep understanding. And of course, that's important and relevant. I'm certainly not saying that we should disregard an academic or a scholarly approach, because I mean, in my heart, I'm really an academic. Like, I love to study. I'm a nerd. However, when we're always looking outside of ourselves for an authority figure to tell us the answer or tell us the meaning, I think so much is lost. And what I've noticed in myself relatively recently, and I mean, when I say recently, I mean sort of in the last 10 years or so, is a much deeper embodiment of my own understanding. So these days when I read, for example, Yoga Sutras or Bhagavad Gita, I'm reading and I'm contemplating without lots and lots of external reference. And in the beginning, when you first start to study these scriptures, you need the external reference. You need guidance. You need help unpacking what's going on and understanding. But once you've reached a certain level of contemplation and time of being immersed in the scriptures for a certain amount of time, actually what's required is an inner journey and an inner reflection. And so for me, I think, you know, what's beautiful about Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is actually the balance of masculine and feminine. And again, you mentioned this, and I'll just clarify, we're certainly not talking about men and women here. We're talking about the polarity of sacred masculine, divine feminine. You know, if we look at chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutras, for example, Patanjali is very much in the mode of the masculine. You know, he gives us lots of lists, lots of guidance, lots of specific, do this, don't do that. This is the goal. Here's how to reach it. It's very much the kind of linear model of here's how to get to yoga. And then when we come to chapter 3, Vibhuti Pada, it's all the esoteric. The timelines become much more blurry. Everything's a lot more nebulous. He starts to talk about the yogic siddhis, the secret superpowers that we might experience as a result of the practices. And I think really what's happened is, because of the Western influence in the way that we study and learn, we've given a lot more weight and a lot more authority to chapter 2. And many teachers and many practitioners have sort of disregarded chapter 3, or if not disregarded it, it's like, oh, that's not really, we don't really know about that. That's a bit kind of wild and wacky and esoteric. And let's just stick with what makes clear sense. Let's stick with the linear path. And it's been my experience that the linear path can only get you so far. I mean, we all know this, like life doesn't work according to complete logic and order and reason all of the time. We can't control it. We can't contain it. And so becoming comfortable and at ease with the messier, wilder, more magical areas of life and of our own consciousness and our own capacities is actually a great gift. I mean, it's a great support if we can do it in a way where we don't get too kind of freaked out. And I actually think that Patanjali gives us a lot of guidance for that. If you really dive into chapter 3, although it is very much in the realm of divine feminine and the realm of the esoteric, without a doubt, we're given signposts along the way. And so for me, I've been very deeply immersed in chapter 3 as a kind of investigation and inquiry in my own practice, and then of course in my teaching as well. Because chapter 2 is wonderful, but it's very, very available. Chapter 3 is intriguing to me.
I think that also applies across the board to a lot of traditional yogic texts. There's all these sort of hidden secret meanings, or there's things that allude to things or that indicate towards something if we have the awareness to, you know, take our mind beyond what is, you know, practical and tangible and literal. That's where I think the nectar is available to us. And I suppose that really emphasizes how relevant and essential it is to study with someone, you know, rather than just pick up a book and read it, because it tends to be, you know, quite dry, especially perhaps for the Western mind and the Western conditioning. So given that this contemplation has, you know, obviously a creative, intuitive, and perhaps you could say like a mystical feminine approach, could we dive into your current direction as it pertains to masculine and feminine within your life right now and the work that you're offering? So you've sort of expanded upon this already, but those terms can be a little bit elusive to people. And so perhaps if you can share your thoughts, your directions, your experience in a practical sense, which is perhaps a very masculine request, I guess, but hopefully just to serve to make those concepts more relatable.
Yeah. I've been, over the last few years, diving more and more deeply into pranamaya kosha, the body of energy, and moving away from physical asana practice. That has certainly not been a huge focus for me. I mean, it hasn't been for the last few years. And what I'm investigating in my own sadhana, and then as a result in my teaching, which for me those two are always inextricably linked, like where I'm practicing and where my own personal study and sadhana is anchored will always be where I'm teaching from. That's just been the natural kind of organic flow. So I'm very interested in energy body and what energy body has to offer us and what it feels like and how we can be in relationship with it. And that is becoming more and more a focal point in my teaching, whether it's through philosophy or through the lens of Ayurveda, and more broadly, increasingly, just sort of general women's work, which is a bit of an umbrella term, but that's definitely kind of the direction that I'm very immersed in at the moment. So, I mean, just a very simple example to bring it back to practical terms. I am regularly doing practice at the moment that involves a body check-in that isn't necessarily oriented around the physical, like, you know, where do I have aches and pains? Where do I have tension? Where do I have, feelings of expansion or contraction in the physical body, which of course is helpful to identify what's the breath doing, all of those things. But rather, and in the beginning, when I first started doing this practice, I'll be honest with you, Amy, I had to suspend disbelief and sort of I had to say to myself, okay, even if I feel like I might be making some of this up, and even if I feel like it's not really happening, and I've sort of been so deeply conditioned to not believe in my energy body or to not have access to it, that there's a cynical voice that's present internally, I'm going to pop that cynical voice to the side, and I'm going to tell myself or ask myself to be willing to explore and to be curious and to see what comes up. And so as I do my meditation, or, you know, as I go about my day and I'm, you know, different things are happening, I will consciously bring awareness to what's happening in my energy body. And that's quite difficult to articulate. And it's quite difficult for me to even kind of, be able to, like, I don't even have words for it within myself, but it might be something like, okay, I've spent, a few hours working on my laptop, and I can feel that the energy in my body is very high. It's in my head. There's a lot of chitta vritti. It feels kind of almost electrical, frazzled, like little sparkles of firecrackers kind of going off high in my body. So that's an energetic imprint that you might have when you've spent a lot of time with technology. I have a similar feeling when I come off a long flight as well, that feeling of like, it's almost like a radiation type feeling, not physical, energetic. And so then it's like, okay, I want to balance that out. I want to feel more integrated. So I need earthing. I need to stand on the earth. I need to anchor into my womb energy. I need to take some long breaths that draw energy down into the body. That's one example. Another way that I do this practice might be when I'm lying in bed at night. I'm very interested, and I have been for many years, in the moment of falling asleep and the moment of waking up, which many of the scriptures speak about. And so I use that as a really pivotal time in my sadhana practice. And in that moment of falling asleep and in the moment of waking up, having an awareness of what's happening in the energy body is very potent. And I feel that we can do a lot of reorganizing almost. Like, so, let's say, I've got 5 children. I could easily go to bed feeling a bit frazzled and overwhelmed, and like I've still got a lot of things going on in my head, busy, getting all the children to bed and reorganizing the house ready for the next day is sometimes like a military operation. And I try to go to bed early too, because we get up so early. So I want to, prioritize sleep, etc., etc. So as I get into bed, all of that's going on. And then there's this opportunity before I fall asleep to notice, okay, what's happening in the energy field? How does it feel? And then actually, how can I recalibrate that? Like, how can I use visualization, breath, words, images to come back to a place that's more aligned with where I want to be as I drift into sleep. So I don't know if that, I haven't spent a lot of time articulating this stuff, so I'm not sure if it's coming over in a way that's clear, but that's the truth of where my practice is at right now.
It definitely translates, although I can appreciate that it is challenging to translate that experience. It's almost like you're tapping into and also creating through your awareness these portals in time where you can connect with and just have awareness of literally what's happening through the subtle body, which is it isn't emphasized enough. This whole subtle yogic anatomy is not really emphasized enough within the sphere of yoga. And, you have such a beautiful way of articulating, I mean, everything you've said and your experiences and what really deeply resonates. And it's interesting because I've been having a conversation like this with many people of late. This is really pertinent, that I think the maturation of your practice, you move away from asana. You are naturally just inclined to the inward practice and the realm of the subtle body. And it's like a maturation in terms of your age, but also like your experience of yoga, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it totally does. It totally does. And for me, it's been a very natural and organic process. It hasn't been that I've sort of thought, okay, now this is the next step and this is where I want to be focusing. It's actually just been a very natural evolution. One of the things, it's a very practical piece, which has taught me about this energetic piece, is that one of the skills I really cultivated as a parent of so many children and someone who does quite a lot of work in the world as well, is the ability to switch from one thing to another quite quickly and with focus. So people often ask me, oh, how do you get so much done? How are you so productive when you've got so many children? And there's a couple of answers to that. One is that it's my full-time job and I generate income through doing it. So I have focus because it's a job like any other job, and you turn up to work and you focus and you get paid. So that's part of it. But the other part is I've really honed this capacity, and I do think this is very much to do with having a lot of children, a lot of demands on my time and energy, to be very focused in short bursts of time. So let's say I've got like half an hour. I could, write an email or write a part of a chapter of a book, or, put together some graphics for something that I'm a new course that I'm creating. And I can go in and I can do it with a lot of focus and come back out again and then be present for my family, present for my kids. And so this ability to switch between different demands on my attention and yet give full focus is something I've really honed. And what I've found is as that was happening in the material world, which was something I did quite deliberately, I was like, okay, this is a skill I want to master. I want to be able to like breastfeed my baby with full attention and then do a work-oriented task with full attention and not lose 20 minutes in between because I'm just kind of transitioning and fudging around, which anyone who's got children will relate to that. And there's a discipline and some strategy that's involved there. But a beautiful byproduct of that started to emerge in my practice, that I noticed I was able to go deeper quicker in areas of my sadhana. Like I was able to get on the mat, sit for meditation, do some journaling, whatever it might be. And I'd go in so much quicker with so much more clarity and focus, and then be able to come out in a more kind of clean and clear way. So I feel that, and again, this may sound a little esoteric, but I feel that there's a lot going on in the energy body there. There's the practical piece, but there's also an energetic piece in that has something to do with a sort of clarity, almost like a cleanliness in the energy field, where there's not too much murky, kind of sludgy in between spaces. The exception to that, and I know you'll relate to this, where the wheels fall off completely on that, is in sleep deprivation. So when I'm not sleeping, if I've got a sick little one or something going on with sleep, then it all gets completely different.
You surrender.
yeah then you have to go, okay, all right, I'm just getting through, and then I'll come back to all the things that I all the clarity and the focus. And
you've kind of partially answered my next question, but it leads into it so nicely. And this is a bit of a masculine and feminine sided question, but with everything you've just said and your capacity to be able to really drop into your practice, drop into your work, drop into presence in each individual thing you're doing, despite having to switch, which I think, it's just very typical of motherhood. You have 5 children. And so what are those distinct boundaries that you put into place, to protect your time, to respect your time, for those around you to respect your time? And in addition to that, I notice it appears that you really integrate the essence of ritual into daily life as well, which is a real feminine approach. So, how do you weave that in as well? It's like you're making space for all these different things. And yeah, I'd just love to know how you create the boundaries and the structure to invite also ritual into your life too.
Yeah. It's, I feel like it's a constant work in progress. And as the children grow, like I've got a broad spectrum. My eldest is 17, my youngest is 17 months. So, there's a wide age range. And as they grow, the family, our home changes and evolves. And so the rhythms and the routines around that and my time change and evolve. I feel very fortunate that I've been able to curate a career that allows me to be present as a stay-at-home mum. Although I sometimes feel like I would like my children to take that more seriously. I mean, there was a good example this morning where my son asked me to drive him somewhere. And I said, no, I can't. I'm recording a podcast. And I said, why don't you ask Sam, my partner, his stepfather, who's working right now, but sometimes is driving between building sites and could possibly, because his work is local. I was like, why don't you ask Sam? He said, I can't ask Sam. Sam's working. And I was like, yes, and I'm working too. Mm. So in some ways, I've done a great job because my kids feel like I'm very present and they feel like they have a stay-at-home mum. And in other ways, I'm sometimes wanting to flag to them that my work is work and it is important. Anyway, that's an ongoing conversation about the role of men and women and working in the home and outside of the home and what have you. With that said, I do have really clear boundaries around when I work and when I don't work. So I mostly work within school hours. And again, very focused, very intentional. There's some really basic discipline pieces around that. Like I learned very early on, I need to make sure people know I'm not available. It's not like I'm just, can go and have a coffee or hang out or like it's work time. And then when I stop and I am very present for the family. I also do have help, which makes a huge difference. I'm certainly not doing everything on my own. And my older kids are very much part of supporting the household to run efficiently with, a fair bit of guidance. And I think another part of it, which has to do with raising slightly older children, like teenagers and beyond, is I pick my battles. Like there are lots of things I would like to be different in our household, and some you win, some you lose. When it's really, really important to me, then it'll be something I'll really hold space for and be very assertive around. And then there are other areas in which I allow it to be more flexible. And then, things come and go and change and ebb and flow. Like, for example, recently I've been identifying we used to be very, very strict with a family meal at the end of every day, like dinner time. We'd sit around the table, a meal would happen, everyone would be together. That's really falling apart at the moment in my family because of the age range of the children. Baby needs to eat earlier. Older kids are often out and about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm like, okay, I'm observing that this ritual that's actually very important and I think is really critical to healthy family life is disintegrating. And it's my job really as the matriarch, that might sound old fashioned, but that's how I see it, to pull that back together. If I don't do it, it will just kind of disappear like water, running away. And so I find myself in family life from quite a yogic lens, surveying the land, surveying the territory, looking at, okay, where's everyone at? What's happening? Where do we need support? Where are we on track? Where are we going off track? And then kind of guiding the river, and sort of bringing it back and setting boundaries with clear communication. And usually that's a fairly effective methodology. I mean, it's a family. Sometimes it's, there are ups and downs, but I feel that I think about sattva and I think about the idea of what it means to live in a sattvic way. And I often use that as my guide. So, for example, sometimes my children, especially elder children, are wanting to do things that I don't really agree with. Like I was telling you before, my 14-year-old son is obsessed with fishing. Like he's just, all he wants to do is go fishing all the time. Now, I've practiced ahimsa my whole life. I don't eat animals. I don't want animals to be harmed. I've raised my children to think in that way. So for me, I have a fundamental ethical issue with fishing. And that could become, a real point of contention for me and my son. Or I can have the conversation with him about fishing, which we've had many times, and we talk about what it might look like to be more humane. And he's spoken about how it's helped him to really connect the dots with all sentient beings. And, when you've killed a fish, you think about what it might look like to kill a cow, for example, and that's where your steak has come from. So it's actually been an important piece for him in connecting the dots. And I've also looked at it in terms of, well, he's spending a lot of time in nature. There's a meditative element to it. It's about him developing his own sense of independence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I can flip the coin either way. I can say, oh, this isn't ideal. It's not what I'd really like. And then I can also go, however, there are elements that are working. And I think what I try to do in terms of running a household and being a parent is amplify the elements that are working and just sort of, as best I can, navigate around the areas that aren't in complete alignment with my values.
That resonates so deeply, for sure. And I'm the same. I mean, I've been eating vegetarian diet now for, I think, 17, maybe 18 years. And I can relate to that too. And yeah, it's interesting. You can have these conversations, but at the same time, at least there's a difference here. If someone's going out to catch their fish or hunt for their food, it's a different, I guess, experience and conversation than someone that is just going down the street and getting fast food or like fish fingers from the frozen section at the supermarket. There's an experience, your son would be having this experience with nature, and it's also teaching him more about animals, animal life, and life itself and death through this very direct, tangible experience for essentially catching his own food. And there is tremendous value in that. So I can see the inner conflict, but also how there's wisdom on each side. And that's where I love, the teachings in yoga and the teachings of vairagya and, non-attachment, dispassion. It's like, okay, what's my karma? And I can have those conversations with others and instill, and really stand up for what I believe in, but ultimately also surrender to allowing them to sort of walk their own path, especially as a parent.
Yeah, it is a dance. It really is. There's a surrender, and then, but there's also, we can surrender too much, and then there's no sense of boundary. There's no sense of guidance. So I think, especially with teenagers, it really is that balance. And so, sometimes I feel like I go on the wrong side of it. I'm too stern or I'm too fluid, and I sort of have to re-navigate and bring myself back. But that's how I think about it. I think about it really, it goes back to what we were talking about before. It's an energetic dance around holding space and being a stable, safe container and allowing freedom within that.
I love that. Katie, I'd love to pivot a little bit. Each year you host an online summit, and you've evidently been someone who's been so successful at building community, both in person and online. Why do you believe that is? And what is it that you focus on in a practical sense to grow and connect with your community and your online audience as well, given that there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes, particularly for the summit as well? I'd just love to know about what drives that, and what do you think is that big key influence on building the community?
Honestly, I don't really know what the answer to that question is, and people have asked me about it. Again, I think it's partly a karmic thing, that I'm just naturally a person that really enjoys bringing people together. I get so much joy from it. When I ran yoga studios, my favorite part of that by far was hosting guest teachers and bringing workshops together, bringing retreats together, bringing community together. I feel like it's not actually my favorite to be in the spotlight. Like, being up on the stage and being the teacher isn't my favorite place to be. I enjoy that and I can do it, but my real calling is to be the behind the scenes organizer, bringing something together and serving community in that way. And I think there's a connection there again between having a large family too. I feel like it's not an accident that I've got this big family that I care for as well, because again, it's this sort of behind the scenes mother hen vibe is very much my jam. And that's what I do as a homemaker, and it's really what I'm doing in my work. I do have a genuine intention that I come back to often to be of service. And when I'm creating a new piece of work and offering a course, I've just finished writing a book, I come back and again and again and again, like my deepest prayer within that is, may this be of service. And I'm always careful to check the narcissistic tendency that all teachers can have, you know, that ego tendency that we can all have to make it all about myself. Like I really, I'm very careful to make sure that what I'm sharing, particularly if I'm sharing personal stories or anecdotes or my own journey, that it's relevant and helpful beyond just, you know, my lived experience. When I stopped running in-person studios, and I started to work mostly online, which like 99% of my work now is online, the part I missed the most by far was hosting guests and running these, you know, workshops and retreats. And the summit was my solution to that. I just desperately wanted to bring together groups again, my teachers, inspirational, you know. It's also, I mean, honestly, on a purely selfish level, like it would be like I'd read an amazing book and I'd be like, oh, I just want to chat with that author. Maybe it's a bit like having the podcast. I've never had a podcast, but it's like,
Totally.
I want to talk to this person. I want to ask that person this question. And the summit is a beautiful excuse to reach out to all these amazing, amazing women that I just desperately want to be in their space and spending time with them. And the summit creates a platform for that.
And so what do you think is the biggest challenge you've faced though? Because obviously it would be, you know, it's a lot of work that goes into it. And what's the biggest challenge, and therefore what is the biggest lesson that you've learned in putting it on and bringing it to life on several occasions?
Yeah, there's two challenges. So one is just admin load. Like it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of emails. It's a lot of logistics. I do have an assistant and I have people that work with me and support me, a small team. But that still is huge. The admin load is huge. Just running an online business, there's a lot of behind the scenes admin that people don't realize goes on. So that's one element. And then the other element is, and it's like any endeavor that you know, anything big that you want to do in your life, is just being robust enough to accept rejection. You know, like if you put yourself out there, in anything, whether you create art, whether you're a writer or a singer, or you paint, or whatever you do, if you consistently put yourself out there, you'll get as many no's as you get yeses. So, you know, there are plenty of people I've asked to present at the summit who haven't said no, didn't even ever get back to me sometimes. You know, people who have said yes, but then pulled out, you know, all those types of things happen. And it's just not taking that personally. There's a beautiful teacher. In fact, she's been in the summit more than once. Biet Simpkins. She wrote a book called Don't Just Sit There. She's a brilliant meditation teacher. And she wrote a post recently that I was looking at on Instagram. It really spoke to me. It was around this idea of rejection, that, you know, the more you put yourself out there, the more you make yourself available for people to love you, but also to not like you. And you just get better at being okay with that. And, you know, that's the part I find a little bit hard, because, you know, we all want to be loved and liked in every way, and people to support our work. And that's the reason I'm sharing that, is not in any way as a sort of poor me story. It's just to say that behind every success is also a lot of work and a lot of bits that weren't successful that you don't post on Instagram. You know, I don't post all the teachers I asked to come and be in the summit who didn't reply to me or didn't say yes. And so you don't see that. And so for people who are starting out and looking at someone who is established in something, you know, like me, that has had a career for a long time, what's really important to know is that doesn't just, it's not all just one big success story from beginning to end.
It makes me think of the idea that Victoria Washington is really highlighting at the moment about responsibility. So she's obviously relating that to money. But here it's kind of the same thing. It's like, if you want a bigger business, if you want to reach more people, if you want to, serve and connect with a bigger audience, you also have to be willing to take on the responsibility of that, which means more rejection as well as acceptance, to share that in a simplified way.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. And more risk. When I first ran the summit, I ran Facebook ads. I didn't, I had to spend money on those. I didn't know if it was going to be successful. I didn't know if there'd be a return on revenue for that. Like, I've written books without knowing if I'd ever get them published. Like, taking a risk, being willing to taking a lease on a very big building in the middle of Newtown in Sydney, not knowing whether anyone would ever come and do yoga in that building, So I think there's a certain sort of entrepreneurial spirit that is willing to be a little bit risk-taking too, and that's part of it as well.
I'm sure that's part of your success. You're not going to make it anywhere if you don't, take that risk, I suppose. Sounds so cliche, but...
Well, it's one of the cliches, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Katie, I'd love to know, for the listener, what would be, you're welcome to go beyond one, but what would be one book on your yoga and one book on Ayurveda that you love and you think everybody should be reading?
Oh, okay. Well, Ayurveda is easy because my teacher, Maya Tawari, who is the founder of the Wise Earth School of Ayurveda, Mother Maya, we call her, has written several books. My favorite of hers is The Path of Practice, which is really an entry-level Ayurveda book. It's one I've recommended to probably thousands of students now. And it's an incredible way of stepping into Ayurveda through the lens of the feminine. So exactly what we talked about before, because Ayurveda can be very prescriptive and very much taught in the mode of the masculine, lots and lots of rules and regulations and protocols. And we can feel like we're not doing it right if we're not doing everything in the way that it's sort of prescribed by scripture. And I feel that what Mother Maya does in her work is really give a permission slip for doing your best. Your best is good enough. And The Path of Practice is a beautiful example of that. So that would definitely be the Ayurveda one. And then at the moment, I think probably for yoga, it would be the book I mentioned before, which is The Secret Power of Yoga, Nishala Devi, which is just a beautiful translation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, again, through the feminine lens. So you can see the theme that's, running through my work at the moment.
I'll pop those books both in the show notes. I definitely second The Path of Practice. I picked up a copy of that, I think, on my very first trip to India, which is maybe, 12 years ago now. And, it's much loved. And I think it's such a timeless book for anybody at any point on their path. Even though you said it's very entry level, it's still just an incredibly rich book. And I just love the way that she articulates everything. And you've obviously had so much of her wisdom brought through into your life, which is just such a blessing. On the subject of books, I'd love to know what you're reading at the moment, which is possibly more than one thing I tend to find, but what would you like to share about what you're reading at the moment?
So interesting. So I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I read prolifically. So I read a lot. Like, I'm an avid reader. I don't watch a lot of TV, and I do read a lot. So at the moment I'm reading, I can't remember the name of the title of it, but I'll give it to you. So if people are intrigued, you can pop it in the show notes. It's a book that is written by a Christian woman, and it's about homemaking and family and God, and referencing homemaking to biblical kind of connection. And I love it. Like, I'm so enjoying it so much, because really a lot of what she's describing is sadhana, and she has 5 children as well. So that's very resonant for me. And she talks a lot about, finding joy in things like making a simple meal for your family, doing your laundry, like all these kind of like basic household things that we have to do over and over again. And she writes a lot through the lens of gratitude, through the lens of what I would call sattva. So yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And as I'm reading it, it's becoming evident. It was recommended by a friend who's a Christian, that she is quite homophobic and also anti-abortion, which I am not. And so it brings up this thing that's so interesting, because, I thought about, I'd love to share this book with a few people because there's people I know that would get a lot of benefit from it. But then immediately I'm like, actually, I'm not going to share this with anyone because I don't want to be associated with recommending something that's homophobic and, anti-abortion. But one of the things I've learned, Amy, over the years, and I'm sure you'll resonate with this, and I'm sure many of your listeners will as well, is that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are so many teachers that shared good teachings that then, in terms of being guru or someone that we could uphold as living according to those teachings themselves, is a fallen guru, a fallen teacher. So many times that we've seen in this tradition and in others, not just in the yoga tradition, but in many different religions, philosophies, anything really, where someone's upholding a particular way of life, where we see the cracks in the person, or we see parts of the teachings that resonate and then other parts that really, really don't. And what I've learned is take the parts that work and just gently leave to the side the parts that don't. So even though there's a part of me that feels like, when I read a couple of really quite homophobic sentences in this book, and I was like, oh, it's so jarring because I'm enjoying the book so much. And then she says these awful things and I feel it in my body, it's like a visceral kind of reaction. And so the temptation is to just throw the book away and go, oh my goodness, no, that's not for me. But actually to then keep reading and continue to receive the teachings that are resonant for me and helpful, whilst being able to put to the side the parts that strongly are not, is something I feel I've become more skilled at doing as I've aged and as I've deepened my practice. And even to the point where, and I started doing this during the pandemic, I quite consciously now sometimes consume news media or read books or watch something that is in direct contradiction to my own thought system or beliefs or values, because the way the world is now, with the algorithms and with the bubbles that we live in terms of being fed content that aligns with what we already believe and think is true, is such that we can just get more and more blinkered. Actually, we think that we're expansive in our thinking, but if we're not exposing ourselves to multidimensional, different, really different ways of thinking, then we're not. So yeah, that's been part of it too. I am really interested in what other people think and feel, even if it's very, very, very different to my own values.
I honestly, I can't love that, what you've said more. Like this, I had this feeling in my chest just building with excitement. I was like, oh my God, Katie, like you're my person. I love you so much, because this kind of mentality is what I personally really associate with a middle path way of thinking. It's someone who can see both sides of the coin. And it doesn't mean, I don't think it means fence sitting. It can, but for me personally, it's like, can I, with a level head and an open mind and an open heart, see just both sides, like polarities, and sit with them and witness them in my mind, in my heart, in my body, and also be able to accept and support some things on this side and that side. And, I think that, and I've spoken to this previously on other episodes on the podcast, but we live in such a polarizing time. And what you have just said is just, it comes from such maturity and wisdom. And yeah, we need to all get out of our own echo chamber and really seek out deep, respectful, open, calm conversations with people that may have really differing views. And that's the only way that we're going to make progress in the world. And you're really embodying that capacity to maintain a level of emotional regulation, equanimity, steadiness, neutrality. It's all the yoga coming through. It's really, you're living yoga, through that capacity. And I'm totally with you, and I salute you, and I hope that it deeply resonates with the listener for sure. Katie, what do you have coming up? I know that you said to me in a message that you're kind of moving into a rest period. You've done so much this year. You've had so many offerings and so many courses and whatnot, particularly online. What does the future hold?
Yeah, this year's been huge for me. My business has grown a lot this year, which has been really beautiful. And it's also been my baby girl's second year of her life, which of course is huge as well. So it's been a big, big year. beautiful, juicy. Yeah, like it's been a great year. It's also been a year that's felt a lot more settled because there was a huge amount of change in my life. I mean, obviously we all went through the pandemic, but around that time I also met my partner. My children started, in a very intense way because of all the lockdowns, living with him, and so they had kind of a new stepfather in their lives, and lots of change, and then a new baby, change, everyone kind of readjusting and reacclimatizing. The last year has been steady. It's felt very beautiful and not tumultuous, and I think as a result, my business has been able to expand as well. I've just finished writing a book which will be coming out in January. It's called Trust Yourself, and it's really, I wanted it to be called The Yoga of Prayer. So it's actually it's guided by prayer and conversations with Source or God or divine consciousness, whatever name you want to give that entity, and through these prayers, sort of an inquiry or investigation as to how we can become more aligned with our intuition and trusting our own inner knowing. The publishers, I think probably quite rightly, felt that the Yoga of Prayer was not a particularly marketable title. And there's always this interesting, whenever you put something out into the world, I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but there's this interesting balance between the work that we want to do and then what seems to be commercially marketable, or what is in alignment with what people want or are interested in. Anyway, I'm very happy with Trust Yourself as a title. That works for me too. So that'll be coming out in January, which is exciting. And that's, I mean, it's a whole process, writing, editing, all the back and forth that takes, and is involved in that. I am definitely, as the year winds up, going into more of a rest period. Like, I'm looking forward to some time, like not online, to be honest. I mean, I'm always doing bits and pieces, but I've got a few travels organized, which will be really lovely. Going to be spending some time down on the South Coast. I'm going to India in January as well, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, just a little bit of a kind of gentle closing off for the year. And then the book will come out. And then I'm sure February is always the summit, which we've already spoken about. And then it all just kind of starts up again. So, but it is, I think, my dominant constitution in Ayurveda is Pitta. And so there's always a lot of drive and a lot of ambition and a lot of focus. And I actually have to really check myself. And my partner, who's very Kapha, is really good at helping me with this, to take the rest periods as well as the intense working, projection periods as well.
Well, it sounds like a perfect way to just transition into the Australian summer here, for sure. And Trust Yourself is a beautiful title. That definitely landed for me when you said that, because obviously I was aware that you've been writing the book, and yeah, I think that's beautiful. It's simple, it's clear, it's direct, and it has a little bit more of a wider range in terms of reaching an audience. And congratulations, that's really exciting. Another book. So where should we send the listener? Website, social media? What's the best place?
So Bhakti Rose, the website is Bhakti, BHAKTI Rose, ROSE.com.au, and the Instagram is also bhakti.rose.
Fabulous. We'll pop those in the show notes. But yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to add to this conversation before we wrap up?
No, I'm just so happy to have had this time to chat with you. And like you said, I feel that we're really kindred spirits. We have so much in common, even to the point where, we often completely inadvertently have similar offerings at the same time, and we're working on similar projects at the same time. I really enjoy our connection. And I feel, Amy, that, you in my life have been a real example of someone who always comes from a perspective of collaboration rather than competition. And I appreciate that so much. Like, it's really beautiful when the yoga community, we come together as, I guess, what you might call senior teachers, and there's a real spirit of collaboration and celebration and upliftment of each other. And I feel that you do that not only for me, but for many others. And yeah, I celebrate that in you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's huge, wildly generous of you. And I mean, the feeling is so mutual. I absolutely admire you and all that you're doing. And sometimes I think, how does she do that? She's like totally Wonder Woman. It's just incredible. And you're an absolute gem. I'm not only So grateful for your time today, but also for your contribution to our community as well, and particularly for your kindness and your support toward me and my work directly. So thank you so, so much. If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favor and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.